The wagon jolted over another rut in the dirt road, and Martha Collins gripped the reins tighter, her knuckles white beneath the grime and dust that covered every inch of her skin. Behind her in the wagon bed, 6 pairs of eyes watched the approaching mountains with a mixture of hope and fear that broke her heart every time she glanced back. She had promised them a new life, but now, with the last of their money gone, their supplies dwindling to nothing, and winter threatening in those dark peaks ahead, she wondered if she had led her children to their deaths instead of their salvation. The letter from her late husband's cousin had been clear. There was work in Guthrie, Oklahoma, opportunities for a woman willing to labor hard. But that was before the wagon wheel had cracked outside of Kansas City, before the fever that had taken 2 weeks of their travel time and nearly claimed her youngest, before the man in Wichita had sold her spoiled flour and rancid bacon at twice the fair price. Now it was late September of 1885, and instead of arriving in Guthrie with enough to see them through until she found work, Martha was arriving with 6 hungry children, a lame horse, and exactly 13 cents to her name. The youngest, 3-year-old Samuel, whimpered in his sleep, curled against his sister Lily's lap. At 7, Lily was trying so hard to be brave, but Martha could see the exhaustion in every line of her little body. The older ones, Benjamin at 13, Ruth at 11, Joseph at 9, and Anna at 8, sat quiet and watchful, their childhood stolen by the last terrible year. First, their father had been killed in a logging accident back in Missouri. Then the bank had taken their home when Martha could not pay the mortgage. And now this desperate flight west to a town she had never seen, to people she did not know, with nothing but desperation driving her forward. The road began to climb, winding up into the foothills. Martha's arms ached from controlling the wagon on the steep grade, and the lame horse struggled with every step. She should have stopped hours ago, should have made camp in the valley, but something had driven her forward. Perhaps it was the knowledge that they had no food left for breakfast. Or perhaps it was simply that she could not bear to see the hope die in her children's eyes for one more night. Either she found help soon, or they would all be sleeping under the stars with empty bellies and no prospects come morning. The sun was setting, painting the rocks in shades of gold and crimson when she saw the cabin. It sat in a small clearing off the main road, smoke rising from its chimney in a steady gray column that spoke of warmth and food and safety. Martha's heart clenched with longing so fierce it was almost pain. The cabin was large, larger than any homestead she had seen in miles, built from solid logs with a good roof and a sturdy barn behind it. Whoever lived here was no struggling settler, but someone who had carved out a real home in this wilderness. She should keep going. She had no right to impose on strangers, no claim on anyone's charity. But Samuel whimpered again, and Benjamin's stomach growled so loudly she could hear it from the driver's seat, and Martha found herself turning the horse toward the cabin almost without conscious thought. Just this once, she would beg. Just this once, she would ask for help for her children, even if it meant swallowing every bit of pride she had left. The cabin door opened before she had even brought the wagon to a full stop, and Martha's breath caught in her throat. The man who emerged was massive, easily 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed broad enough to block out the sunset behind him. He had dark hair that hung past his collar, a thick beard, and eyes that even from a distance she could see were a startling blue. He wore buckskin pants and a wool shirt, and he moved with the careful grace of a man who had spent years in the wilderness. A mountain man, Martha thought, her heart sinking. Such men were known for their isolation, their fierce independence. He would likely send them away without a second thought. But he did not. Instead, He walked toward the wagon with long strides, his eyes taking in the lame horse, the worn canvas cover, and finally settling on Martha's face with an intensity that made her want to look away. She forced herself to meet his gaze, to lift her chin despite the tears that threatened at the corners of her eyes. "Please," she said, and her voice cracked on the word. "Please, sir, I do not want to impose, but my children have not eaten today and we have nothing left. If you could spare even a bit of bread, I would be grateful beyond measure. I can work for it, I can wash or mend or cook, anything you need." The mountain man's blue eyes moved past her to the wagon bed, and Martha saw something shift in his expression. He stepped closer, and she saw his gaze move from face to face, taking in Benjamin's protective stance in front of his siblings, Ruth's hollow cheeks, Joseph's two bright eyes, Anna's trembling lip, Lily's careful cradling of the sleeping Samuel. For a long moment he said nothing, and Martha felt her last hope beginning to die. Then he spoke, and his voice was deep and rough as if he did not use it often, but there was a warmth in it that made Martha's eyes fill with tears. "My house just became a home today," he said simply. "Come inside. All of you." He did not wait for her to respond, just reached up and lifted Samuel from Lily's arms with a gentleness that seemed impossible in a man so large. The little boy stirred but did not wake, and the mountain man carried him toward the cabin as if he weighed nothing at all. Martha scrambled down from the wagon seat, her legs nearly giving out after so many hours of driving, and helped her other children down. They clustered around her, uncertain and afraid, but she could smell food cooking from inside the cabin, and hunger drove them forward. The interior of the cabin was warm and clean, with a large fireplace at one end and a long table in the center. There were shelves lined with supplies, furs hanging on the walls, and a real wooden floor instead of packed dirt. The mountain man laid Samuel on a wide bed in the corner, covering him with a thick quilt, then turned to face the rest of them. "My name is Pierce Vance," he said, directing his words to Martha, but including all the children in his steady gaze. "I have lived alone in these mountains for 8 years. I do not mind the solitude, but I will not turn away a woman and her children who need help. There is stew on the fire and bread in the oven. Sit and eat, and then we will talk about what comes next." Martha opened her mouth to thank him, to promise that they would not stay long, that she would work to repay his kindness, but Pierce held up one large hand. "Eat first," he said firmly. "Everything else can wait." The children did not need to be told twice. They scrambled toward the table, and Martha had to force herself to move slowly, to help Pierce ladle out the stew, to cut the bread and make sure each child got a fair share, even though every instinct screamed at her to shovel food into her own mouth as fast as she could. The stew was rich with venison and vegetables, the bread was fresh and soft, and Martha had to blink back tears as she watched her children eat. Benjamin ate with fierce determination, protecting his bowl as if afraid it might be taken away. Ruth ate more slowly, savoring every bite. Joseph and Anna ate steadily, while Lily kept looking over at Samuel to make sure he was still sleeping peacefully. Pierce moved around the cabin while they ate, pulling more blankets from a chest, stoking the fire, never intruding but always present. Martha found her eyes following him despite herself. He moved like a man comfortable in his own space, and there was a quiet competence to everything he did that spoke of someone who had survived alone in harsh conditions. But there was also a loneliness to him, a careful distance he maintained, as if he had forgotten how to be around people. When the children had eaten their fill and were leaning against each other with drowsy contentment, Pierce brought out more quilts and began arranging them near the fireplace. "They can sleep here where it is warmest," he said to Martha. "The bed is yours, I will take the loft." "No," Martha protested immediately. "You have done more than enough. I cannot take your bed. The children and I will sleep by the fire, and you should keep your own space." Pierce looked at her for a long moment, and Martha felt heat rise in her cheeks under that steady blue gaze. "You are exhausted," he said finally. "You have been caring for 6 children on your own, driving a wagon with a lame horse, and from the look of that wagon you have been traveling for weeks if not months. You need real rest in a real bed. I am used to the loft. Please do not argue." There was no harshness in his tone, but there was a finality that made Martha realize arguing would be useless. She nodded, too tired to fight, and began helping the children settle into their blankets. Pierce moved up a wooden ladder to the loft without another word, and Martha heard the creak of ropes as he settled onto what must be another bed up there. When the children were all asleep, Martha allowed herself to sit on the edge of the bed Pierce had offered. It was comfortable, the mattress thick with what felt like goose down, the quilts soft and warm. She should take off her boots, should lie down and rest, but instead she found herself staring at her children in the firelight, her mind whirling with too many thoughts to settle. How had she come to this? A year ago she had been a respectable widow with a small home and enough money to feed her family. Now she was dependent on the charity of a stranger, a mountain man she knew nothing about, in a cabin miles from anywhere. She should be terrified. She should be making plans to leave at first light. But instead, all she felt was a bone-deep relief that her children were warm and fed and safe, at least for tonight. Martha must have dozed, because she woke to the sound of movement in the cabin. Pale dawn light was filtering through the windows, and Pierce was already up, rekindling the fire and setting a pot to boil. Martha pushed herself up from the bed, guilt flooding through her at having slept so long. She should have been up first, should have been the one preparing breakfast to repay his kindness. "I apologize," she said softly, not wanting to wake the children. "I should have helped. I did not mean to sleep so late." Pierce glanced at her, and in the morning light she could see his face more clearly. He was younger than she had thought, perhaps only 30 or so, with strong features and those startling blue eyes. There were scars on his hands and a jagged line along his jaw that spoke of a hard life, but there was also a gentleness in his expression as he looked at her that made her heart flutter strangely. "You needed the rest," he said simply. "Your children are still sleeping. Let them. We have time." "Time for what?" Martha asked, moving closer to the fire. "I should be planning to leave to get to Guthrie and find work. I cannot impose on your hospitality any longer than necessary." Pierce was quiet for a moment, stirring something in the pot that smelled like oatmeal and honey. "What kind of work are you expecting to find in Guthrie?" he asked finally. Martha felt her cheeks burn. "I had a letter from my late husband's cousin. She said there were opportunities for women willing to work hard. I can cook and clean and sew. I thought perhaps I could find a position as a housekeeper or work in a boarding house, something that would allow me to support my children." "With 6 children," Pierce said, and there was no judgment in his tone, only practicality. "Most positions like that would not allow you to keep them with you. You would need to find someone to take them in, split them up perhaps, and Guthrie is still rough. There are opportunities, yes, but there are also dangers for a woman alone with children to protect." Martha felt her throat tighten. She knew he was right. She had been trying not to think about it, trying to hold onto the hope that had driven her west, but the reality was stark and cold. "I have no other choice," she said quietly. "I lost our home in Missouri. I have no family who can help. It is Guthrie or nothing." Pierce ladled oatmeal into bowls and set them on the table. "There is another choice," he said, not looking at her. "You and your children could stay here. The cabin is large enough." I have supplies enough for winter if we are careful, and I can hunt and trap to add to them. Come spring, if you still wish to go to Guthrie, I will take you there myself. But at least you would have the winter to rest, to let your children recover their strength, to make plans without desperation driving every decision. Martha stared at him, her mind reeling. I cannot do that, she said finally. I cannot simply impose on you for months. You do not know us. You owe us nothing. Why would you make such an offer? Pierce finally looked at her, and the expression in his blue eyes made Martha's breath catch. Because my house just became a home today, he said again, and this time she heard the loneliness beneath the words. I have lived alone for 8 years by choice. I had a family once, a sister I loved, but she died of fever and I buried her myself. I thought I wanted solitude, thought I was done with people and their complications. But when I saw you and your children yesterday, something in me knew. This is what I have been waiting for, even if I did not realize it. A chance to be part of something again. A chance to help, to matter, to make a home instead of just surviving. Martha felt tears prick her eyes. That is kind, she whispered. So very kind. But you do not understand what you are offering. 6 children are loud and messy and difficult. They will disrupt your peace, intrude on your space, demand constant attention and care. You may regret this offer within a week. A small smile tugged at the corner of Pierce's mouth, the first she had seen from him. Let me worry about that, he said. For now, just say yes. Give yourself and your children this gift of safety and rest. Everything else we can figure out as we go. Martha wanted to argue, wanted to maintain her independence and her pride, but she could hear Samuel stirring in the bed, could hear the other children beginning to wake, and she thought of the long, hard road to Guthrie, the uncertainty that waited there, the very real possibility that she would have to split up her family just to keep them fed. Here, at least for a few months, they could stay together. Here they would be safe. Yes, she said finally, the word barely more than a whisper. Yes, and thank you. I will work to earn our keep. I will cook and clean and mend, and when spring comes I will repay you somehow for your kindness. Then it is settled, Pierce said, and the warmth in his voice made Martha feel something she had not felt in a very long time. Hope. The first weeks in the cabin were an adjustment for everyone. The children, so long used to hardship and uncertainty, could barely believe their good fortune. They ate 3 meals a day, slept in warm blankets, and slowly began to lose the haunted look that had shadowed their eyes. Pierce treated them with a patient gentleness that surprised Martha, never raising his voice even when Joseph accidentally spilled a full pot of water, or when Anna knocked over a stack of furs he had been sorting. He simply cleaned up the mess and moved on, as if such things were to be expected when sharing space with children. Martha threw herself into work with fierce determination. She scrubbed the cabin from top to bottom, organized Pierce's somewhat haphazard supplies, mended every piece of clothing that showed even the smallest tear, and cooked elaborate meals with the provisions Pierce had stored. She was determined to prove her worth, to show that taking them in had not been a mistake. But more than that, she found herself wanting to please Pierce, wanting to see that small smile tug at his mouth when he came in from checking his traps to find hot coffee waiting and fresh bread on the table. Pierce himself remained something of a mystery. He was gone for long hours during the day, checking his trap lines in the mountains, hunting for fresh meat, chopping wood to ensure they had enough fuel for the winter. But in the evenings he would sit by the fire while Martha cleaned up from dinner, and slowly, carefully, the children began to approach him. First it was just Benjamin, asking questions about tracking and trapping with the careful formality of a boy trying to prove himself a man. Pierce answered every question seriously, never condescending, treating the 13-year-old with respect. Then Ruth began to ask him about the mountains, about the animals he saw, about the life he had lived before settling in this cabin. Pierce's answers were brief at first, but gradually he began to open up, telling stories of his years as a trapper, of the harsh winters and dangerous wildlife, of the beauty of the wilderness when dawn broke over snow-covered peaks. His voice was low and steady, and Martha found herself pausing in her work to listen, caught by the glimpses of the man behind the careful distance. Joseph and Anna were next, drawn by the simple fact that Pierce never seemed annoyed by their presence. They would sit near him while he worked on various tasks, cleaning his rifle or sharpening knives, and pepper him with the endless questions of curious children. Pierce answered them all with patience, occasionally reaching out to ruffle Joseph's hair or steady Anna when she leaned too close to see what he was doing. Little Lily took the longest to warm up to Pierce, watching him with solemn, dark eyes for days before finally approaching. It happened one evening when Martha was putting bread in the oven and Pierce was sitting by the fire. Lily walked right up to him, her small face very serious, and held out the rag doll she carried everywhere. "Her name is Rose," Lily said softly. "She was my grandmother's before she was mine. She is very special." Pierce looked at the doll for a long moment, then carefully took it in his large hands. He examined it with complete seriousness, as if it were the most important thing in the world. "She is beautiful," he said finally. "You must take very good care of her." "I do," Lily said firmly, "because things that are special need to be protected." "That is very wise," Pierce said, handing the doll back gently. "You are a good girl to understand that." Lily nodded, satisfied, and then did something that made Martha's heart clench. She climbed up into Pierce's lap, settling against his chest as if she belonged there, and Pierce's arms came around her automatically, holding her with a careful tenderness that brought tears to Martha's eyes. The big mountain man and the small girl sat like that for a long time, watching the fire together, and Martha saw something shift in Pierce's expression, some wall he had built around himself beginning to crumble. Samuel was still too young to have much opinion on anything other than whether his belly was full and whether he felt safe, but even he began to reach for Pierce when the mountain man came into view, babbling nonsense words and giggling when Pierce lifted him high in the air. Pierce seemed bemused by the toddler's affection but never pushed him away, often carrying Samuel around on his shoulders while going about his evening chores. As for Martha, she found herself growing more confused with each passing day. She was grateful, of course. Pierce had given them shelter when they had nowhere else to turn, had fed her children and kept them warm and safe. But it was more than gratitude that made her heart race when Pierce walked through the door each evening. It was more than gratitude that made her notice the strength in his arms as he lifted logs for the fire, or the gentle patience in his voice when he talked to her children, or the way his blue eyes would sometimes rest on her face with an expression she could not quite read. She had loved her husband, had mourned him deeply when he died, but that love had been the comfortable affection of a marriage arranged by parents, two young people who grew to care for each other over years of shared life. What she was beginning to feel for Pierce was something different entirely, something fierce and sudden and terrifying. She was a widow with 6 children, dependent on his charity, in no position to have such feelings. And yet she could not stop them, could not stop the way her breath caught when their hands accidentally brushed while washing dishes, or the way she found herself watching him when he thought she was not looking. October faded into November, and the first snow fell on the mountains around them. Pierce began teaching Benjamin how to set snares and read tracks, taking the boy with him on shorter trap runs. Martha worried about the danger, but Benjamin came back glowing with pride and confidence, and she could not bring herself to object. Pierce was giving her son something she could never provide, teaching him how to be a man in this harsh wilderness, and Benjamin was blooming under the attention. Pierce also began teaching Ruth how to identify useful plants, showing her which roots could be dried and stored, which bark could be used for medicine, which berries were safe to eat. Ruth followed him around with intense concentration, absorbing every word, and Martha realized her daughter was developing the same fierce determination to learn and contribute that drove Martha herself. One evening in late November, after the children were all asleep, Martha was finishing the last of the dishes when she felt Pierce's presence behind her. She turned to find him standing close, his expression uncertain in a way she had never seen before. "Martha," he said quietly, and her name on his lips sent a shiver down her spine. "I need to speak with you about something." Martha's heart began to pound. Had she done something wrong? Was he regretting his offer? Was he going to ask them to leave despite the snow already piling deep outside? "Of course," she said, proud that her voice was steady. "What is it?" Pierce ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of discomfort. "I want you to know that my offer for you to stay the winter still stands," he said. "But I also want you to know that you are not a servant here. You do not owe me work in exchange for shelter. You are a guest, you and your children, and I will not have you running yourself into exhaustion trying to repay a debt that does not exist." Martha felt her cheeks burn. "I am not running myself into exhaustion," she protested. "I am simply doing my part. You provide the shelter and food, I manage the household. It is a fair arrangement." "It would be a fair arrangement if that was what I wanted," Pierce said, and there was something in his voice that made Martha's breath catch. "But that is not what I want, Martha. I do not want a housekeeper or a servant. I want what I said that first night. I want a home. I want laughter and noise and life in this cabin. I want to see your children grow and thrive. And I want you to feel safe here, not like you have to earn your right to exist in my space." Martha stared at him, her mind whirling. "I do not understand," she said finally. "What are you saying?" Pierce took a step closer, and Martha could smell the scent of wood smoke and pine that clung to him. "I am saying that in the few weeks you have been here, you have changed everything. This cabin has not felt like a home in 8 years, not since my sister died. It has been a shelter, a place to sleep and store my furs and wait out the winters. But now I wake up to the sound of children's laughter. I come home to hot food and warm smiles. I have someone to talk to in the evenings, someone whose mind challenges mine, whose strength awes me. You have brought life back into these walls, Martha, and I do not want you to feel like you are simply working for your keep." "Pierce," Martha whispered, and she could feel tears threatening. "You are too kind, but you do not owe me pretty words. I know what I am. A widow with 6 children and not a penny to my name. You have given us shelter and safety, and I am grateful beyond measure, but I do not expect more than that." "What if I want to give more than that?" Pierce said, and his blue eyes were intense on her face. "What if I want to build something here, Martha? Not just for a winter, but for a lifetime." Martha's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "What are you asking me?" she whispered. Pierce reached out and gently took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "I am not asking anything yet," he said softly. "It is too soon, and you have been through too much. I just want you to know that you and your children are not an imposition. You are a gift, one I did not know I needed until you arrived. And whatever happens, whether you stay or go come spring, I want you to know that these months with you have meant more to me than all the years before combined." Martha felt a tear slide down her cheek, and Pierce reached up with his free hand to gently wipe it away. The gesture was so tender, so careful that it broke something inside her, some wall she had built around her heart. "I have not felt safe in so long," she whispered. "Not since my husband died, not since we lost our home, but here with you I feel safe. My children feel safe. I do not know how to repay that." "You do not have to repay it," Pierce said. "Just stay. Let me get to know you, let me be part of your family. That is all I ask." "Just stay," Martha repeated, and then she did something bold, something she would never have dared a few weeks ago. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Pierce, pressing her face against his chest. For a moment he went very still, and then his arms came around her, holding her close, and Martha felt something inside her finally relax. She was home. After all the running and fear and desperate scrambling, she had found home in the arms of a mountain man who had claimed her house, had become a home the day she arrived. December brought heavy snows that transformed the world around the cabin into a pristine white wonderland. Pierce showed the older children how to make snowshoes from willow branches and rawhide, and they spent hours tramping through the drifts, exploring the nearby woods, and learning to read the signs of animals taking shelter from the cold. Samuel loved the snow, squealing with delight as Pierce carried him outside to catch snowflakes on his tongue, while Lily built elaborate snow castles near the cabin door with Anna's help. Inside, the cabin was warm and full of life. Martha had found Pierce's store of fabric and had begun making new clothes for the children, their old ones being nearly worn through. She worked in the evenings by firelight while Pierce told stories, his deep voice filling the cabin with tales of his years in the wilderness. Some were exciting, full of danger and narrow escapes. Others were funny, making the children shriek with laughter. And some were poignant, glimpses into the loneliness he had endured and the losses he had suffered. Martha learned that Pierce had been born in Kentucky, that he had come west as a young man of 22 seeking adventure and fortune in the fur trade. He had thrived in the wilderness, his natural strength and quick mind serving him well. But when he was 24, his younger sister Emily had followed him west, running away from an arranged marriage their parents had planned. Pierce had been furious at the risk she had taken, but had welcomed her into his life, building this cabin so she would have a proper home. For 3 years they had lived here together, happy and content, Emily keeping house while Pierce trapped and hunted. Then a fever had swept through the nearest settlement, and though they were miles away, somehow Emily had caught it. She had died in Pierce's arms, and he had buried her on a hillside overlooking the valley, her grave marked with a simple wooden cross. After that, Pierce had retreated fully into solitude. He had stopped going to settlements, stopped seeking the company of other trappers, stopped believing he deserved or needed anything beyond simple survival. For 5 years he had lived like that, until the day Martha and her children had appeared and reminded him what it felt like to be part of something larger than himself. Martha's heart ached for the pain Pierce had endured, but she also understood it. She knew what it was to lose someone you loved, to feel like the world had ended, and you were simply going through the motions of existing. But she also knew what it was to find hope again, to discover that life could still hold joy and meaning even after terrible loss. She and Pierce had that in common, that understanding of grief and the slow, painful process of healing. As December wore on, Martha found herself growing closer to Pierce in ways that both thrilled and terrified her. They worked together in comfortable silence during the day, moving around each other with an ease that spoke of growing familiarity. They talked in the evenings after the children were asleep, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes and fears, their dreams for the future. And sometimes, Pierce would reach out and take her hand, or she would rest her head on his shoulder, and they would simply sit together in the firelight, content in each other's presence. The children noticed, of course. Benjamin began watching Pierce with a new intensity, as if trying to decide whether this mountain man was worthy of his mother. Ruth started making knowing looks whenever Martha blushed at something Pierce said. Joseph and Anna started calling Pierce Uncle Pierce without anyone telling them to, and he accepted the title with a gravitas that made Martha's heart swell. Lily, already devoted to Pierce, began insisting that he tuck her in at night along with Martha, and Samuel's first clear word after Mama was Pierce, which made the mountain man's eyes suspiciously bright. Christmas was a revelation. Martha had not expected Pierce to care about the holiday, but he surprised them all. He brought in a small pine tree and let the children decorate it with strings of berries and bits of colored fabric. He carved wooden toys for each child, simple but beautiful things that showed hours of careful work. For Benjamin, a knife with a carved handle. For Ruth, a set of plant-gathering tools. For Joseph, a miniature trap that actually worked. For Anna, a wooden horse with a real horsehair mane. For Lily, a new doll to keep her Rose company. And for Samuel, a set of carved animals that the toddler immediately began carrying everywhere. For Martha, Pierce gave a beautiful shawl made of soft rabbit fur, lightweight but incredibly warm. For the cold mornings, he said gruffly, not meeting her eyes, and Martha had to blink back tears at the thoughtfulness of it. Martha had made gifts too, though they seemed poor compared to Pierce's handcrafted toys. She had sewn each child a new set of clothes from Pierce's fabric stores, made with love and care. For Pierce, she had made a new shirt, the stitching tiny and perfect, dyed a deep blue that matched his eyes. When he put it on Christmas morning, the expression on his face made every hour she had spent sewing by candlelight worth it. That night, after the children were asleep and the cabin was quiet, Pierce drew Martha outside to look at the stars. The sky was clear and impossibly vast, diamond-bright stars scattered across velvet blackness. Pierce wrapped his arms around Martha from behind, sharing his warmth, and she leaned back against his solid strength. "Thank you," she whispered, "for making this Christmas magical for my children. They have had so little to celebrate this year." "Our children," Pierce said softly, and Martha's heart stuttered at the word. "They feel like mine now, Martha. I hope that does not offend you, but I cannot help it." Benjamin's pride when he successfully set his first snare, Ruth's excitement when she identified a new plant, Joseph's endless questions, Anna's sweet smile, Lily's trust, Samuel's laughter. They have worked their way into my heart, and I cannot imagine my life without them now. "It does not offend me," Martha said, her voice thick with emotion. "It fills me with more joy than I can express. They need a father, Pierce. They have needed one since the day they lost theirs, and you have been that for them, whether you realized it or not." Pierce was quiet for a moment, his breath warm against her hair. "Martha," he said finally, his voice rougher than usual, "I know it has only been a few months. I know by all rights I should wait, should give you more time, should be patient. But I am not a patient man, and I cannot keep what I feel inside anymore. I love you, Martha Collins. I love your strength and your courage and your fierce devotion to your children. I love the way you hum while you cook, and the way you always make sure everyone else eats before you do. I love the sound of your laugh and the way your eyes light up when you smile. I love everything about you, and I want you to stay. Not just for the winter, but forever. I want to marry you, to make you my wife in truth, to give your children my name and my protection. I want to build a life with you, to fill this cabin with more laughter and love, to grow old with you by my side." Martha turned in his arms, tears streaming down her face, and Pierce looked stricken. "I am sorry," he said quickly. "I should not have said anything." "It is too soon, you are not ready. Please do not cry, Martha. I cannot bear to see you cry." "You foolish man," Martha said, and she was laughing even as she cried. "I am not crying because I am sad. I am crying because I love you too. I think I have loved you since the day we arrived, and you said your house had become a home. I love your gentleness with my children and your patience with their endless noise. I love the way you never make me feel like a burden, the way you treat me as an equal even though I came to you with nothing. I love your strength and your quiet competence and the way you see beauty in this harsh wilderness. I love everything about you, Pierce Vance, and yes, yes, I will marry you. I will stay forever. I will build a life with you and fill this home with all the love and laughter you have been missing." Pierce made a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and then he was kissing her. It was not a gentle kiss, not tentative or careful. It was fierce and hungry and desperate. Years of loneliness and longing poured into the meeting of their mouths. Martha kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands fisting in his shirt. And for a long moment the cold and the snow and the stars overhead all disappeared. There was only Pierce, solid and warm, and hers, finally hers. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Pierce rested his forehead against hers. "I will make you happy," he promised. "I swear it, Martha. I will spend every day of my life making sure you never regret this choice." "I could never regret it," Martha whispered. "You have already made me happier than I ever thought I could be again. You have given me hope and safety and love. You have given my children a father and a home. You have given me everything." They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, making plans and promises under the winter stars. They would marry in the spring, Pierce said, when the snow melted enough to travel to the nearest settlement where there was a circuit preacher. Until then, they would simply be a family, learning to live together, building the foundation for a lifetime of love. January and February passed in a blur of cold and snow and contentment. Pierce taught Benjamin how to hunt with a rifle, and the boy brought home his first rabbit with pride that made Martha's heart swell. Ruth discovered a talent for healing, learning to make poultices and tinctures from the plants Pierce showed her. Joseph became Pierce's shadow, following him everywhere, learning everything he could about surviving in the wilderness. Anna helped Martha with cooking and baking, showing a natural talent for creating delicious meals from simple ingredients. Lily kept everyone entertained with elaborate stories about her dolls, her imagination wild and wonderful. And Samuel grew from a toddler into a sturdy little boy who could walk steadily and chattered constantly in a mix of real words and nonsense that everyone pretended to understand. Martha herself bloomed in the warmth and safety of Pierce's cabin. The lines of strain around her eyes faded. Her cheeks filled out and took on color. She laughed freely and often, finding joy in the simplest things. Pierce courted her in the evenings, bringing her small gifts from his forays into the wilderness. A perfect bird feather, an unusually shaped stone, a handful of winter berries. Martha treasured each one, not for their value but for what they represented. Pierce thinking of her while he was away, wanting to bring her something to make her smile. They talked about the future often. Pierce wanted to expand the cabin, adding rooms so each of the older children could have their own space. Martha wanted to plant a garden in the spring, growing vegetables and herbs to supplement Pierce's hunting. They talked about whether to send the children to school in Guthrie once the weather warmed, deciding that Ruth and Benjamin at least should have more formal education, even if it meant they had to stay in town during the week. They talked about adding to their family, both of them wanting more children, wanting Samuel to have siblings closer to his own age. Pierce admitted he had always wanted a large family, and Martha confessed she had dreamed of having more children, but had thought that dream lost when her husband died. By the time March arrived and the snow began to melt, Martha felt like a completely different person from the desperate widow who had arrived at Pierce's cabin 6 months earlier. She was confident and happy, secure in Pierce's love and in her children's well-being. The future that had seemed so dark and uncertain now stretched before her, bright with possibility. One morning in late March, Pierce announced that the trails were clear enough to travel to town. It was time, he said, to make their marriage official. Martha's heart raced with excitement and nervousness as she helped the children prepare for the journey. It would take 2 days to reach the settlement where the circuit preacher was due to arrive, and Pierce wanted to make sure they had everything they needed. The journey was long but beautiful. The mountains were coming alive with spring, snow melting to reveal green shoots pushing up through the earth, birds returning from their winter migrations, animals emerging from hibernation. The children were excited by the travel, pointing out everything they saw, asking Pierce endless questions about the landscape they passed through. Pierce answered patiently, one arm around Martha on the wagon seat, occasionally pressing a kiss to her temple that made her blush and the older children giggle. They arrived in the settlement, a small collection of buildings that could barely be called a town, on a sunny afternoon. Pierce had been right about the circuit preacher, who was indeed there, and agreed to perform the marriage ceremony the next morning. That night they stayed in a small boarding house, the children sharing one room while Martha had another. She barely slept, her mind full of anticipation and joy. Tomorrow she would become Pierce's wife. Tomorrow she would finally have the security and love she had been seeking. The morning dawned bright and clear. Martha dressed in her best dress, mended and cleaned until it looked almost new, and braided her dark hair with flowers the children had picked. Pierce wore the blue shirt she had made him, and he looked so handsome that Martha's breath caught when she saw him. The ceremony was simple, held in the small church with only the preacher, the boarding house owner, and Martha's 6 children as witnesses. But when Pierce took her hands and spoke his vows, his blue eyes intense on her face, promising to love and cherish her for all the days of his life, Martha felt like the most blessed woman in the world. "I do," she said when it was her turn, her voice clear and strong. "I do take you as my husband, to love and honor for all my days. You have given me and my children more than I can ever repay. You have given us a home and safety and love. I promise to spend the rest of my life making you as happy as you have made me." When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and told Pierce he could kiss his bride, Pierce pulled Martha close and kissed her with a tenderness that made her eyes fill with tears. The children cheered, even Benjamin, and Martha laughed against Pierce's mouth, her heart so full she thought it might burst. They were married. She was Martha Vance now, and her children were Benjamin, Ruth, Joseph, Anna, Lily, and Samuel Vance. They were a family, official and recognized, bound together by love and law. It was everything Martha had hoped for and more. They spent one more night in the settlement, Pierce treating them all to a celebratory dinner at the boarding house, and then began the journey home. Home, Martha thought with wonder. The cabin in the mountains was truly home now, not just a shelter but the place where she and Pierce would build their life together. Spring turned into summer and the cabin buzzed with activity. Pierce expanded the building as planned, adding 2 rooms to the original structure so Benjamin and Ruth could have their own spaces. Joseph and Anna still shared a room, as did Lily and Samuel, but everyone had more room to spread out. Martha planted her garden with Pierce's help, and by June they had rows of green shoots that promised fresh vegetables come harvest time. The older children took on more responsibilities, helping with chores and learning skills that would serve them well in this wilderness life. Benjamin accompanied Pierce on longer hunting trips, learning to track and shoot with increasing skill. Ruth gathered plants and began brewing her own medicines, carefully labeled and stored in the cabin. Joseph helped maintain the trap lines and kept the woodpile stocked. Anna helped Martha with cooking and caring for the younger children, showing a maturity beyond her years. And Martha herself settled into her role as Pierce's wife with joy and contentment. They were well matched, she and Pierce, both strong-willed but willing to compromise, both devoted to the children, both finding joy in the simple pleasures of their life together. Pierce was an attentive husband, thoughtful and loving, always making Martha feel cherished and valued. And Martha made sure Pierce knew every day how much she appreciated him, how grateful she was for all he had done, how deeply she loved him. In July, Martha realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had not wanted to say anything until she was certain. When she told Pierce, his face transformed with a joy so pure it took her breath away. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing like a boy, then set her down carefully as if she were made of glass. "A baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "Our baby, Martha, a child that is both of ours." "Are you happy?" Martha asked, though the answer was written all over his face. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Pierce said, pulling her close. "I am overwhelmed, I am awed, I am grateful beyond words. You have given me 6 children already, 6 beautiful souls I love as if they were my own blood. And now you are giving me one more, one that will be part of both of us. How could I be anything but the happiest man alive?" The children were equally excited when they were told. Benjamin, now 14 and trying hard to be grown up, still grinned like a little boy at the thought of a new sibling. Ruth immediately began planning what plants would be useful for pregnancy and childbirth, determined to help keep her mother healthy. Joseph and Anna started arguing over whether the baby would be a boy or a girl. Lily announced she would teach the baby everything she knew, which made everyone laugh since she was only 8. And Samuel, at 4, was mostly just confused but excited because everyone else was excited. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and into fall. Pierce was attentive to the point of being overprotective, constantly making sure Martha was not working too hard, not lifting anything heavy, not getting too tired. Martha found it both endearing and occasionally frustrating, but she loved him for his care. The cabin was peaceful and happy, full of love and laughter and anticipation. In early November, as the first snow began to fall, Martha went into labor. Ruth, who had been studying everything she could about childbirth, stayed by her mother's side along with Pierce, while the other children waited anxiously in the main room of the cabin. The labor was long but not overly difficult, and when dawn broke over the mountains, Martha delivered a healthy baby boy with a strong cry and a thick shock of dark hair. Pierce held his son with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face, and Martha felt her heart overflow with love. This was what she had fought for, what she had driven that wagon across miles of wilderness to find. Not just survival, but this. A family, a home, a man who loved her and children who were safe and happy and thriving. "What should we name him?" Pierce asked softly, his eyes never leaving the baby's face. Martha thought for a moment. "What was your father's name?" she asked. "Thomas," Pierce said. "Thomas Edward Vance." "Then let us call him Thomas," Martha said. "Thomas for your father, a link to the family you lost. And Edward for your middle name, so he carries part of you with him always." Pierce looked at her with such love that Martha felt tears prick her eyes. "Thomas Edward Vance," he said softly, trying out the name. "It is perfect. He is perfect. You are perfect." "I cannot believe this is my life, Martha. A year ago I was alone in this cabin, convinced I would die alone, convinced I deserved nothing more. And now I have you and 7 children and more love than one man has any right to claim." "You deserve all of it," Martha said firmly. "You deserve every bit of happiness, Pierce. You have earned it with your kindness and your generosity and your love. We are the lucky ones, my children and I, to have found you when we needed you most." The other children were allowed in to meet their new brother, and the joy on their faces made the long night of labor worth every moment of pain. Benjamin held Thomas with careful reverence. Ruth cooed over his tiny fingers and toes. Joseph and Anna argued over who he looked like more. Lily kissed his forehead gently, and Samuel stared at him with wide eyes, reaching out to touch the baby's hand with one pudgy finger. "Our family is complete now," Martha said softly, watching her children gathered around the new baby, Pierce's arm around her shoulders. "This is everything I dreamed of and more." "Not quite complete," Pierce said with a smile. "We have time for more if you are willing. I would not mind filling this cabin with a dozen children." Martha laughed, exhausted but happy. "Let me recover from this one first," she said. "But yes, if we are blessed with more, I will welcome them gladly. Every child is a gift." The first year of their marriage turned into the second, and then the third. Thomas grew from a baby into a toddler, then into a little boy full of energy and mischief. He was followed by another son, James, born in the autumn of 1887, and then a daughter, Catherine, born in the spring of 1889. The cabin expanded again to accommodate the growing family, and Pierce built a larger barn and added to his trap lines to ensure they had enough income to support everyone. Benjamin grew into a strong young man who became Pierce's true partner in the hunting and trapping business. On his 18th birthday, Pierce officially made him a partner, splitting the profits from their furs. Benjamin used his earnings to buy a small piece of land adjacent to Pierce's, planning to build his own cabin there when he eventually married. Ruth developed her healing skills to the point where people from surrounding areas began seeking her out for medical help. She had a gentle way with patients and an intuitive understanding of herbs and remedies that seemed almost magical. She talked of perhaps studying formally to become a nurse one day, and Pierce and Martha encouraged her dreams. Joseph followed in Benjamin's footsteps, learning the wilderness skills that would let him thrive in this harsh environment. He was quieter than his older brother but equally capable, and Pierce predicted he would make an excellent tracker and hunter. Anna discovered a talent for working with animals and convinced Pierce to let her raise chickens, then goats, gradually building up a small farm operation that provided eggs, milk, and cheese for the family and extra to trade in town. Lily, as she grew older, showed a gift for storytelling and drawing. She filled notebooks with stories about the mountains and the people who lived there, illustrating them with careful sketches. Pierce built her a desk near the window where the light was best, and she would sit there for hours, lost in her creative worlds. Samuel grew into a cheerful, sturdy boy who seemed to inherit the best traits of both Pierce and Martha. He was strong and capable like his adoptive father, but also warm and nurturing like his mother. He appointed himself the guardian of his younger siblings, watching over Thomas, James, and Catherine with fierce devotion, and Pierce and Martha grew deeper in love with each passing year. They worked together, played together, raised their growing family together, and fell into bed exhausted but content every night. They had their disagreements, of course, as any married couple did, but they learned to communicate, to compromise, to forgive quickly and love constantly. The foundation they had built on that first desperate night when Martha arrived with 6 children and despair When Pierce had said his house just became a home today, that foundation proved unshakable. Years passed. The children grew and thrived. Benjamin married a young woman from Guthrie and built his cabin on his land, giving Pierce and Martha their first grandchild in 1892. Ruth went to study nursing in Kansas City, but returned home regularly, eventually meeting and marrying a doctor who relocated to the growing town of Guthrie to be near her family. Joseph became one of the most respected hunters in the territory, known for his skill and fairness. Anna's farm operation grew until it was providing income for the entire family. Lily published her first story in a magazine back east, the beginning of what would become a successful writing career. Samuel grew into a strong young man who combined Pierce's wilderness skills with Martha's compassion, becoming a trusted guide for settlers traveling through the dangerous mountain passes. And Thomas, James, and Catherine, the children born of Pierce and Martha's love, grew up knowing nothing but security and affection, surrounded by siblings who doted on them and parents who loved each other deeply. On a summer evening in 1895, Martha sat on the porch of the cabin, now much expanded from the simple structure it had been a decade ago, and watched the sun set over the mountains. She was 40 years old now, with silver starting to thread through her dark hair, lines around her eyes from years of laughter and smiles. Pierce came out to join her, moving a little slower now at 45 but still strong and capable, his dark hair more gray than brown now but his blue eyes as striking as ever. He sat beside her on the bench he had built, and Martha leaned against his solid warmth, his arm coming around her automatically. Below them in the yard, their children and grandchildren played. Benjamin's son was teaching Thomas how to skip stones in the creek. Ruth's husband was showing James some new medical instrument he had acquired. Anna's children were helping Catherine feed the chickens. Joseph was telling stories to a rapt audience of youngsters. Lily was sketching the scene, her hand moving rapidly across the paper. Samuel was helping Benjamin's wife carry supplies from the wagon. "You remember the day we met?" Martha asked softly, watching the golden light paint the mountains in shades of amber and rose. "I remember," Pierce said, his voice still deep and rough even after years of regular use. "I remember looking at you and your children and thinking you were the most desperate, most determined, most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I remember saying my house just became a home today and meaning every word, even though I barely understood why. I was so afraid," Martha confessed. "So terrified that I had brought my children to the edge of the wilderness to starve. I had nothing left, Pierce. No money, no hope, no plan beyond begging a stranger for help. And then you opened your door and your heart and gave us everything." "You gave me everything," Pierce corrected gently. "I was half dead when you arrived, Martha. Oh, I was breathing and moving and functioning, but I was not really alive. I had given up on connection, on family, on love. I thought I was content in my solitude, but I was just existing, waiting to die. You and your children brought me back to life. You reminded me what it meant to be part of something larger than myself, to love and be loved, to have purpose beyond simple survival." Martha turned her head to press a kiss to Pierce's jaw, rough with evening stubble. "We saved each other," she said softly. "I needed your strength and your home, and you needed our love and our chaos. It was fate that brought me to your door that night, Pierce. I am sure of it. Out of all the places I could have stopped, all the roads I could have taken, somehow I found my way to you. Fate or fortune, I do not care which," Pierce said, tightening his arm around her. "I am just grateful for it. Grateful for every day I get to wake up beside you, grateful for every child's laugh I hear, grateful for every moment of this life we have built together. You made my house a home, Martha Vance, and I will love you for that until my last breath and beyond." They sat like that as the sun sank lower, watching their family, listening to the sounds of laughter and conversation and life. The mountains rose around them, timeless and strong, sheltering the home they had built from nothing but determination and love and faith that tomorrow would be better than today. Martha thought back to that desperate widow who had driven a wagon with a lame horse up a mountain road, 6 hungry children behind her, and despair in her heart. She could barely recognize that woman now. The years had transformed her, not through forgetting her pain but through healing it, through allowing love and security and joy to slowly fill the empty places that loss had carved into her soul. And Pierce, the lonely mountain man who had thought himself content with solitude, had been equally transformed. The lines on his face were softer now, eased by years of smiles. His eyes held warmth where once there had been only careful distance. His massive frame was always surrounded by children these days, little ones climbing on him, older ones seeking his advice, all of them knowing they were loved unconditionally by the man who had chosen to be their father. "What are you thinking?" Pierce asked, and Martha realized she had been quiet for a long time. "I am thinking that we are blessed," Martha said simply. "I am thinking that life is strange and sometimes cruel but also capable of extraordinary beauty. I am thinking that I love you more today than I did yesterday, and I will love you even more tomorrow. I am thinking that this, right here, right now, this is what happiness looks like." Pierce pressed a kiss to the top of her head, and Martha felt his smile against her hair. "This is what happiness looks like," he agreed. "And I never want to forget it, never want to take it for granted. Every morning I wake up, I thank God for the day you arrived at my door. Every night I go to sleep grateful for another day with you by my side. You are my home, Martha, you and our children. The cabin is just wood and stone. You are what makes it matter." As twilight deepened over the mountains and stars began to appear in the darkening sky, the family began to gather for the evening meal. The children and grandchildren made their way toward the cabin, calling to each other, laughing, arguing good-naturedly about who would sit where. Martha and Pierce rose from their bench and walked hand in hand toward the door, toward the warmth and light and love waiting inside. Martha paused at the threshold and looked back one more time at the mountains, at the stars emerging overhead, at the life she had built in this wilderness with the man she loved. She remembered arriving here with 6 children and despair, remembered Pierce saying his house just became a home today, remembered thinking she had reached the end of only to discover it was really the beginning. "Thank you," she whispered to the universe, to fate, to God, to whatever force had guided her to this place and this man. "Thank you for everything." Then she stepped inside, Pierce's hand warm in hers, and closed the door on the gathering night. Inside there was food and family, laughter and love, and the knowledge that no matter what tomorrow brought, they would face it together. The widow who had arrived with nothing had found everything. The mountain man who had thought himself content alone had discovered the richness of family. And the house that had been just a shelter had become a true home, filled with the sound of children's voices, the warmth of love shared, and the promise of many more years of happiness ahead. This was their story. A story of desperation transformed into hope, of loneliness healed by love, of a family built not just through blood but through choice and commitment, and the daily decision to cherish each other. It was not always an easy story. Life in the wilderness never was, but it was a good story, one worth telling, one worth living. And as Martha helped serve dinner to her large, loud, loving family, as Pierce stood at the head of the table and bowed his head to give thanks for their blessings, as the children chattered and laughed and filled the cabin with joy. Martha knew without a doubt that every hardship she had endured had been worth it to arrive at this moment, in this place, with these people. The house had become a home. The widow had become a wife. The desperate flight west had become a love story for the ages. And in a cabin in the mountains of Oklahoma, as the 19th century drew toward its close, a family gathered to share a meal and their lives, bound together by love that had started with a simple act of kindness on a cold September evening a decade before. Their story continued for many more years, of course. There were more grandchildren born, more challenges faced, more joys celebrated. Benjamin's land holdings grew until he was a prosperous rancher. Ruth's medical skills saved countless lives across the territory. Joseph's reputation as a hunter and tracker brought people from miles around seeking his services. Anna's farm became one of the most productive in the region. Lily's stories were published in magazines and eventually collected into books. Samuel became a guide of such renown that wealthy Easterners specifically requested him when traveling west. And Thomas, James, and Catherine grew into fine adults who carried their parents' legacy of strength and compassion into the 20th century. Pierce and Martha grew old together, their love deepening with every passing year. They celebrated their silver anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and friends from across the territory. They rocked great-grandchildren to sleep and told stories of the old days when the West was still wild and untamed. They held each other through illnesses and losses, celebrated triumphs and milestones, and never once took for granted the miracle of having found each other. When Pierce was 70 years old and Martha 65, they sat together on the same porch where they had spent so many evenings, watching another sunset paint the mountains in gold. Their bodies were old now, worn by years of hard labor and harsh winters, but their love was as strong as ever. "I would not change a single thing," Pierce said, his voice rougher now with age but still full of warmth. "Not one moment of our life together. Every joy, every challenge, every ordinary day has been a gift." "Nor would I," Martha agreed, her hand clasped in his. "We have been blessed, you and I. Blessed beyond measure." And when their time came, first Pierce and then Martha a year later, they left behind a legacy of love that continued through their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The cabin in the mountains remained standing for generations, a testament to the home that had been built there, not with wood and stone but with love and commitment and the courage to open your door and your heart to someone in desperate need. The story of the widow who arrived with 6 children and despair, and the mountain man who said his house just became a home that day, was passed down through the years, told and retold until it became legend. But those who knew the truth, who had lived it or heard it from those who had, knew it was more than legend. It was a testament to the power of love, the importance of family, and the truth that home is not a place, but the people you choose to share your life with. In the end, that was the real magic of their story. Not that Pierce saved Martha and her children, though he did. Not that Martha brought life back to Pierce's lonely existence, though she did. The real magic was that they saved each other, that they chose each other every day, that they built something beautiful and lasting out of desperation and loneliness and chance. They proved that it is never too late to start over, never too late to find love, never too late to build a home. And in doing so, they created a legacy that endured long after they were gone. A reminder to everyone who heard their story that sometimes the best things in life come when you open your door to someone in need and say, without hesitation or reservation, that your house has just become a home.